So I've been playing a lot of fighting games recently, and I decided to post a list of my top 10 fighting games. I'm sure a lot of people love fighting games. Like, who wouldn't want to pick up a controller and see who can virtually beat up who? So right from the casual to the very big experts, everyone loves fighting games. So I'm going to share my top 10 fighting games from the perspective of a competent casual gamer. Now, just a disclaimer that this list is going to contain some bias because DC Comics and Ninja Turtles are number one and number two of my favorite fictional franchises, respectively. So you can see that this list is going to be biased as a result of that. Everyone's list is biased, so there's nothing wrong with that. Like, everyone else has a different list and it incorporates their likes and dislikes, which is totally fine. And the other part I want to highlight is that along with the gameplay and graphics, the games on this list will be judged according to when they were released by the standards of when they were released. Like, a game that was pretty revolutionary in 1991 will be judged by 1991 standards, and a game that was very good in 2024 will be judged by 2024 standards. So now, having said that, what's also gonna be a part of this list is the impact these respectful games have had on the genre as a whole. So, like, we can say that Street Fighter 2 was basically the granddaddy of the fighting game genre, which ushered in the fighting game craze. So we're also going to be judging based on the impact they had and how much they revolutionized the genre. That's all going to count as well. So let's get on with our list after we just clear up one more criteria for this list. So I also won't be talking about any anime fighters in this video since I'm not a very big anime fan. The only Japanese games that are going to be on are the Street Fighter games and all the crossover games between Marvel and Capcom. So if you're an anime fan and you're expecting some anime games, they're not going to be on this list. I'm sorry about that. So I'm also not really going to be covering any mods. This game is a mod, as you can see. It's called Mugen. What I am going to be covering is games that were actually sold and licensed by official companies and licensed by the official intellectual property holders. We can have a whole different list, and that's what we're going to have in the near future for the best modded games. But they're not going to be on this list because this is purely just the fighting games that were sold and largely available to the public. Like, the modding community for games is not that big compared to, like, let's say someone who just buys a game and plays it on a console. So this first video is just going to stick to basic games that were sold along with their DLC, expansions, all that. And then in the near future, we'll probably have another list for the best gaming mods that have been made by the fan community. Now, I'm not a fighting game expert by any means, and I don't analyze frame data to see when is the best time to do a possible infinite, or how do you do a possible infinite on the AI or on whoever you're fighting online, or if you're fighting your friend, because all that's for, like, the hardcore fighting game enthusiasts. But a big peeve of mine, pet peeve of mine, is when fighting games make supers and ultras, like, excruciatingly hard to do. Because, I mean, the average person, their mind is just not equipped to actually pull off inputs like this and inputs like this in the heat of combat. Because, like, I mean, just look at these inputs. Like, if you have, like, one ultra for Guile and Street Fighter 4, you have to first hold back and charge, then press forward, then do another back and forward along with 3 punches. And the timings for these inputs is just, like, so specific that it's really easy to screw them up. When I used to try playing Street Fighter 4, that's a problem that I used to have. And now look at this ultra right here. Like, you got to hold it back on a 45-degree angle, and then push forward on a 45-degree angle again, and then push forward on a 45-degree angle again, along with three kicks. Like, this this stuff was really annoying to me. That's why I never got into like playing Street Fighter that much, like the core Street Fighter games. Because I mean, like Guile's one of my favorite fighting game characters, but I could never play him because they made it so damn complicated to like actually play Guile. Like the only sort of character that I could play in the in their regular Street Fighter games before Street Fighter 6 when they made the moves easier to do was Ryu, because his hyper was just like quarter circle and three punches. But even that in like the heat of the moment I could hardly ever do, so I used to just use the charge Hadouken and sort of like fight that way. My meter for that. So having moves like these is a really big pet peeve of mine. So it's for this reason that I say that this list is basically from a casual fighting game player's point of view, because I mean in the expert fighting game community a lot of guys like they get really angry when they make the moves too easy to do and they think they're like noobifying the game. But I mean the sad truth is for most of us we can't like really process that fast and hand-eye coordinate that fast to do moves like this like in the heat of combat within like the 1 second window that you have them to do, and moves like this in the 1 second window when you can do them and unleash like a whole barrage of damage on your opponent. So I just want to highlight this, that like my list is going to be heavily influenced by games that have like easy to do moves, and it's because of this reason I like games that have easy to do moves. Like they would say that in among fighting games, the best fighting game is one that you can pick up and play, but it's hard to master. So a lot of these games for me are gonna make the list. Now let's look at another example over here. This is Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters for the Genesis. The Super Nintendo version was really good, so I wanted to give the Genesis version a try, and then I had to look at like all this and I was like, yeah, that's really not gonna happen. Like you only had one super move because it was an older game, and that's fair enough. Even the Super Nintendo version only had one super move for each character. But I mean, like, look at the input for Leonardo. Like, you gotta go back and then quarter circle in a back motion, and then a 45-degree angle again, back down, and then press with one button. Like how would you do an input like this like on a D-pad? Like it's just like beyond me. I don't know, because like I mean this game was like released and it was meant to be played on a D-pad because like back then they didn't really have the thumbsticks. So if someone could show me how to do this on a D-pad, I would have like a lot of respect on them, because I just really don't know how this would work. Now, I'm not gonna say that like I'm bad at fighting games, because like I've achieved some pretty difficult feats in fighting games. An example being in Street Fighter V, I defeated the whole roster on the max difficulty setting using Ryu. I have a video if anyone wants to take a look at that. They can just like look in my videos. And I beat Injustice 2 on a hard difficulty, which was really hard. The Brainiac boss fight was like excruciatingly hard, so that was quite an achievement. But like I just want to highlight that when a game breaks down the user interface, and it's not a very friendly user interface, that's like when I really don't like the game, as I've stated before. So yeah, that's so now you know what sort of games to expect going forward. And I just want to add that in the Super Nintendo version of Tournament Fighters, like literally all you had to do your super move in that was press heavy kick and heavy punch together. That's all. And you would do your super move once your meter was full. But in this game, like, they had a desperation move which was hard to do, and you had a desperation meter. Like, let's say like you got the shit kicked out of you and you're about to lose, and you have like 5% of your health left, and your opponent has like 50% of your health left. So you do this move right here and you do like 30% damage to them, so that gives you a way to come back. But just because of the inputs, This game was like a no-go for me, and that's another reason why the Super Nintendo version was so much better. And we're gonna move on now, so we'll actually get to the list after lots and lots of explaining. Hopefully, that wasn't a turn-off for a lot of people. So at number 10, we have Super Street Fighter 2, the new challengers, the MS-DOS port, or the PC version, as we would likely call it today, because not a lot of people know about MS-DOS today. So just a little bit of history. Like, MS-DOS was the operating system that a lot of computers had before Windows 95 and any like graphical interface like Windows was around. So this version of Street Fighter ran on MS-DOS, which was a command-based interface. So for whatever you had to do, like if you just want to like click on a file like you do now, you couldn't do that. You had to write a whole command like C drive, open this directory, and all that. That's basically in a nutshell what MS-DOS was, and this version of Street Fighter 2 used to run on MS-DOS. And you can hear all the low quality sound and everything. Like, I turned the sound down like a little bit because it's not very good sounding. So, to make the long story short, this was the version of Street Fighter that I had access to like way back in the day, and it came on like floppy disks, because back then the computers didn't even have like CD-ROMs, forget DVD-ROMs or Blu-ray ROMs. They didn't even have like the CD-ROMs, the 700 meg or the 600 meg CD-ROM. So the game came in like floppies, which were like 1 or 2 megabytes, and usually like there was one game and it was like on 5 floppies, and you needed all those floppies to like install the game on your like really old computer. So my uncle had a 75 megahertz computer, and that's the one that we installed Street Fighter on, this version of Street Fighter, the new challengers. Now, the new challengers, Super Street Fighter 2, the new challengers has a pretty bad reputation nowadays, because people say that it's one of the worst versions of Street Fighter. But like, that was the version that I played. I really didn't think that it was that bad. What wasn't good about the PC version was that both you and if you were fighting your friend, they had to play on the keyboard. So doing the super moves was basically out of the question, because on the keyboard they'd be so hard to do, and there was no internet back then, so you didn't know what to do. So all we used to do was just use the basic punch and kick moves and see who could win that way. And it's for that reason why Dalsim was like super overpowered, because if you don't have like the Hadoukens or like the projectiles, then he's like literally the only character that has long range. So whoever used to choose Dalsim used to win at the time. So that's my experience with Street Fighter in the 1990s. Like, most people who played Street Fighter in the 1990s, they played like the arcade version in 1991, which was when the game initially released, and like everyone would be crowding around the arcade to play Street Fighter 2, and then they played it on the Super Nintendo, the Genesis. I never really got the game on Super Nintendo or Genesis. I didn't really have a Super Nintendo. I had a Sega Genesis, but my mom and dad were pretty strict about the amount of games I could get on my Sega Genesis. So between 1995 and like 1998, which was when I was using my Sega Genesis the most, I literally only got 2 games, and those were Ninja Turtles: The Hyperstone Heist, and that was on a multi-card with a bunch of other games, and Mortal Kombat 3, Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, and I'm getting really off topic here, but I just want to say like why I was playing the PC version back then, which was like a very unfriendly user interface to play Street Fighter using the keyboard and mouse, but I mean, something's better than nothing. That was the only like experience I had with the old school Street Fighter 2 in the 1990s, other than if you count like the bootleg NES port, which was going around at the time in like the Indian regions. Everything was back one generation, so when in North America and Europe everyone would be like using Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis, like over there in the Indian regions, the South Asian regions, like they would be using the 8-bit Nintendo, and that's where they had that bootleg version of Street Fighter. So we used to play that, and it only had 5 characters. It had Ryu, Guile, Chun-Li, Zangief, and Bison. And you just used to play those with 8-bit graphics, and needless to say, it wasn't pretty good. So when we finally got the actual Street Fighter game, which was licensed by Capcom for the PC on the MS-DOS, it was a huge step up, and we thought that the game was pretty good for what it was on the PC. Now, the reason why I've included Street Fighter 2, Super Street Fighter 2, and I'll just tell you right now, I haven't included games like Mortal Kombat X, I haven't included Street Fighter 5, I haven't included Super Street Fighter 2 HD Remix, even though I played like those games. And I really like those games, except for maybe Street Fighter 5 because I didn't think it was that good. But I really like Mortal Kombat X, and I really like Super Street Fighter 2 HD Remix. So the reason I've included those is because, like, you gotta put everything into perspective. In like the 1990s, this was pretty good, and then the amount Street Fighter 2 revolutionized the genre. Like, this was a game that came along and basically ushered in the fighting game genre. So we can say that Street Fighter 2 was the pioneer. So Capcom got it really right the second time around when the Street Fighter 1 didn't do so well. And Street Fighter 1 didn't do so well because of a number of reasons, which is really what I don't want to get into for the sake of this video, because the video is going to be too long. But because of like the impact Street Fighter 2 had on the genre, it's on number 10, and because of judging the game for like how good it was in like the 1990s, when basically you fighting a friend was a new concept. Like, you beating the shit out of your friend in a virtual setting was like a new concept that hadn't really been done before. So it's for that reason I'm putting a version of Street Fighter 2, the version of Street Fighter 2 that I played, as number 10 on this list. And moving on now. Now, next up we have Mortal Kombat 2 for the Sega Genesis. And it was also on Super Nintendo, but the version that I played was the Sega Genesis version. And basically you can say that this is the first ever fighting game that I really got into, because we got our Sega Genesis like a little bit later. Like, as I was saying, everything was behind in the Indian and the South Asian region, so we got our Sega Genesis in 1995. So that's when Mortal Kombat 1 had been way past its prime, and Mortal Kombat 3 was only out in like USA and Europe and Japan and probably all those big gaming regions. So I had Mortal Kombat 3, and this game was the one that really got me into fighting games, and I used to try and beat the AI and get beat to shit because the AI, from what I've heard, uses like move reading in this game. Like, the AI reads your moves and accordingly like immediately does counters. So it's pretty hard to land damages, and I don't remember what difficulty I used to play at, but the furthest I ever reached was Kintaro, and I couldn't beat Kintaro, but my bro managed to beat Kintaro. My elder bro managed to beat Kintaro, and he couldn't beat Shao Kahn. So, needless to say, this game really kicked our asses, and I guess that was sort of good about the game, that it was hard, so it trained us well in the art of fighting games going forward. And as far as Mortal Kombat goes, I would say that Mortal Kombat 1 was the one that laid the foundation and further revolutionized the fighting game genre. That's why we have a Mortal Kombat, like an early Mortal Kombat game on this list, like one of the Mortal Kombat games from the original trilogy, which was Mortal Kombat 1 to Mortal Kombat 3. Amongst those three games, I think Mortal Kombat 2 is the best. So Mortal Kombat 1 was the one that revolutionized the genre. Like, it introduced digitized graphics instead of hand-drawn sprites, and it also introduced the fatalities, and what's really important is that it introduced the easy-to-do moves. which was really a blessing for anyone who was struggling with fighting games. Like, I remember through trial and error, we figured out that Sub-Zero's freeze was front down in A, and that's a move that we used to use a lot to fight the AI, and I think that's how my bro defeated Kintaro. Like, he kept freezing him over and over and uppercutting him. As if memory serves me right, obviously, like, there's no way to check because it was so long ago, but yeah, I would say Mortal Kombat 2 was the one when they like close to perfected the formula. Like, I mean, the two main villains in this game, Shao Kahn and Kintaro, were so much better than Shang Tsung and Goro. Like, Goro was pretty good, but I mean, Kintaro gets a lot of hate for being like basically a copy and paste version of Goro, but I think Kintaro is pretty cool too, with his whole like half tiger, half dragon. Has a little bit of human persona or like species, whatever you want to call it. And needless to say that among the villains, Shao Kahn is just like so much more intimidating and so much more brutal than Shang Tsung could ever be. And he's literally the best villain in Mortal Kombat. That's why like some of the three best Mortal Kombat games, Mortal Kombat 2, Mortal Kombat 9, and Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks, all involve like fighting Shao Kahn in the end. And some of the other characters like Reptile and Baraka, they're so much more like intimidating and look so much more bloodthirsty and ruthless compared to like someone like Kano, for example. So I would say that Mortal Kombat 2, among the original three Mortal Kombat games, was the game that really made Mortal Kombat like one of the best fighting game franchises out there. And it's for this reason, for the impact that it had, and for how much entertainment it brought during like the early days when we didn't have a lot of games to like actually play, and we didn't have a huge selection. We couldn't go online and fight people. This was the game that brought us a lot of fun, really back in the day when we were all kids, and a lot of like young adults and teenagers today weren't born. So if you want a glimpse at the past, just look at how this game was. Like, all you could do was fight the AI on like ladder mode and fight your friend, and that was all there was to it. And we were okay with that because we didn't know that things were gonna get a lot better going forward in the future. Alright, next up we have MK vs DC. This game released in the winter of 2008, November 2008. And by that time I had moved to Canada for many years, so this was before gaming went digital for the most part. So I was in a small town and I walked, I think, like, I don't know, must have been like at least 4 kilometers just to rent this game, and then walk back just to drop it off from the Blockbuster, because there were only 2 Blockbusters in the whole town. And I know a lot of people don't like this game, and it gets a lot of like criticism that it's really bad and there's no fatalities and the gameplay is bad and the 3D environments, controlling the 3D environments is bad. All the usual stuff that the 3 games of the, or 4 games, however you want to look at it, Mortal Kombat games of the 3D era get. I would rate them like as 4 games of the 3D era. There's Mortal Kombat 4, Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance, Mortal Kombat Deception, and Mortal Kombat Armageddon. And they say that this game suffers from like the same problems as those 4 games, being that it's a 3D fighter and you can move around the stages in a circular motion, which is not very good, and I agree with that. But during when this game released, and a little bit after when it released, like, everyone was still used to the 3D fighter, so they didn't really find it all that unusual or all that unorthodox like we do now, because now everyone's like used to 2D fighters, 2.5D fighters where the graphics look 3D, but there's only like one plane to move front and back, and you can't really move sideways. But yeah, it's for that reason I say that the controls in this game have not aged well, because if I go back and try to play this game now, I'm not going to be able to play it, because like with the thumbstick, when you unintentionally press like up to jump, you move around the fighting area in a 360-degree motion. So you have to use the D-pad to move, not move, to jump and then move down. which is something like I can't get myself to do. I can't coordinate between the D-pad and the thumbstick that good anymore as I used to be able to do, just because the controls in the games have gotten better. But I mean, for what this game did right, I thought like they handled the DC characters pretty well in this game. Like, it was literally 13 years before the DC characters appeared in another fighting game. The last time before this game they appeared was Justice League Task Force, and that was released way back in 1995, and it wasn't received that well. But I mean, for what this game was, like how it allowed you to use the DC characters, the story mode, like it was pretty good. Like, I mean, they combined the two universes pretty well and how they interacted and all that. So that's what I liked about this game. And the other part that I really liked about this game is that I'm a huge Superman fan, and like Superman was the guy from the DC side who was only strong enough to take on the final boss. And when you progress towards the last chapter, you see that you're playing as Superman, and that's when I really started to like fanboy and really love this game back in the day, because it was Superman who was the strongest out of all the DC characters, who had to put in like his A game in order to like save two universes. So that got me pretty pumped. So all in all, this game is pretty good. It definitely holds a good place for as far as nostalgia goes. But the only problem is the controls, so it hasn't aged like all that well. But for what it did, for how much fun it was back in the day, like this game also, I would say, contributed a lot to crossover fighters and like generally how crossover fighters played. And it was the first game that NetherRealms and Midway were able to develop by having characters licensed from DC Comics. So we can almost say that if MK versus DC did not walk, we would not have Injustice and Injustice 2. Like, Injustice and Injustice 2 would not be able to run if MK versus DC did not walk. So the way I look at it is, in order for Injustice 1 and Injustice 2 to exist, like, there had to be a Mortal Kombat versus DC universe, and then whatever mistakes they made with Mortal Kombat versus DC universe, they corrected in the Injustice series, which is exactly what happened. So it's for that reason MK versus DC is number 8 on our list. Alright, then next up we have Killer Instinct 2013. And this was an amazing remake that Microsoft brought us years and years after Killer Instinct 2 released. I think Killer Instinct 2 released like in the mid to late 1990s, and then this game was brought back like almost maybe 16 years later with Killer Instinct 2013. And initially, when the old Killer Instinct games were going around in the arcades and the Super Nintendo, there was no way for me to play them because I did not have a Super Nintendo and I had a Sega Genesis. And since my older bro decided to get a Sega Genesis, so we got a Sega Genesis. That's usually how it went. And we did not get a Super Nintendo, maybe because the Super Nintendo was a little bit more expensive, whatever the reason was. I don't really remember, but back then, like looking back now, I think there were a lot of better games on Super Nintendo than there were on Sega Genesis. Like, I mean, Turtles in Time was so much better than the Hyperstone Heist. Killer Instinct was so much better than Eternal Champions. It's like Killer Instinct was the exclusive game on Super Nintendo, and Eternal Champions was the exclusive fighting game on Sega Genesis. Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter were on both consoles, but as far as like exclusives went, I think Super Nintendo was definitely the better console. But we're getting sidetracked again, so we're talking about Killer Instinct and we're talking about its history. But yeah, I mean, Killer Instinct also revolutionized the fighting game genre, the old game from the 1990s, because in order to win in Killer Instinct, you had to perform combos, and if you weren't performing combos, like you'd get beat the hell up because the AI would be really good at performing combos, just like you're seeing in this playthrough that I did a couple of days ago of single fights using Jago on the second highest difficulty, the killer difficulty, like just how important combos were. And then it added a whole bunch of like new creative characters to the roster. Like Jago was a pretty cool original character that the game had. Black Orchid was also another very good original character, and basically the whole cast was like original and really good. There was the Skeleton Spinal, there was Saberwolf, there was Riptar, who was a dinosaur, there was TJ Combo, and like these were not like ripped off characters from previously very famous fighting games, as the trend was back then in like the late 1990s to like basically make like Street Fighter clones or Mortal Kombat clones, like in the I shouldn't be saying late 1990s, in the 1990s in general. That was the trend. But basically the story behind Killer Instinct was that Nintendo was so impressed with Rare that they got Rare to make their Donkey Kong game for the Super Nintendo, and then they also got Rare to make Battletoads to cash in on the beat 'em up genre that was going around at the time, that was popularized by the Ninja Turtle games, the Streets of Rage games, the Final Fight games, the Double Dragon games. So they had to get their own like I would say their own like first party Battletoads to try and capitalize on that. And then they got Rare to make Killer Instinct to further capitalize on the fighting game craze that happened a little bit later after the beat 'em up craze, to capitalize on the success of Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter. That's why you see Killer Instinct is pretty similar mechanics wise to Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter, and the look of the characters is pretty inspired by Mortal Kombat. But I would say Killer Instinct is original enough that you can say that it's its own like famous sort of mechanics for its own type of fighting game. Like the heavily based combo fighting in Killer Instinct is pretty cool, and all their characters are pretty original. So you can't really say that they've plagiarized like a lot of Mortal Kombat characters or a lot of Street Fighter characters. The only thing I find funny is that Jago has the Shoryuken and the Hadouken, and like when he does the when he fires his projectile, it sounds like very similar to Ryu saying Hadouken. I guess I was like maybe left there intentionally just as like a tribute to like Street Fighter, which is totally fine. But all in all, I really like this game, and it's a solid example of how a remake should be done, because I never got to experience the older Killer Instinct games. The best I could do was just see them in the arcade. Like I've narrated this story so many times before in some of my other videos, but in case like you don't know, in like the Indian region, arcade games were super expensive. So the equivalent of like $3 way back in like the 1990s, which would probably be, I don't know, like something the equivalent of like $7 or $8 now. That's how much you needed to like have one credit in both like fighting games and beat 'em ups. So for that one credit, you would get like one chance at Killer Instinct. Like if you lose one match, like it's over, then you got to put in another credit, and that's like another $7 or $8 in today's money. And as far as like beat 'em up goes, beat 'em up games meant like you had one credit which gave you 2 lives, and if you used up that credit like really early, you got beaten up, then you had to like keep putting in more credits. So like my parents would never give me like that amount of money for arcade games, so the best I could do was like sit back and envy how good the games looked. And Killer Instinct definitely did look good way back in the day with like all its creative characters, like the Skeleton Spinal, as you can see. He's in the video right now, and the Saberwolf, where you control like a werewolf, and then you control a dinosaur and all that. So good stuff from Killer Instinct, and it's for all these reasons, the pioneering, the good innovation in combat, the creative characters, that Killer Instinct appears on number 7 in our list. So for number 6, we have Mortal Kombat 9, and this game was initially just called Mortal Kombat, but the way I sort of address the Mortal Kombat games and the confusing timeline is that we take the first two games that were just called Mortal Kombat, which is Mortal Kombat 1 from 1992, I think, and Mortal Kombat 9 from 2011, and just call them Mortal Kombat 1 and Mortal Kombat 9. And then the most recent game as of the making of this video, which is called Mortal Kombat 1, which makes it even more ridiculous, we'll just refer to as Mortal Kombat 2023. So, as we've said before, the best way to address this game is actually just to say Mortal Kombat 9, which makes total sense since it's like the 9th Mortal Kombat game in the regular series. You just call it Mortal Kombat 9. Just drop the confusion and just use numbers. I don't know why that did not happen before, but that's how we'll address the game going forward. Now, this game is another good example of how a remake should be done, and this game did everything right as far as a remake goes. Like, it brought back some of the best characters from the old games. People say that the 3D characters from the 3D games, as you said before, Mortal Kombat 4, Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance, Mortal Kombat Deception, and Mortal Kombat Armageddon, were the weaker characters for Mortal Kombat. I agree for like the most part. I think like the earlier characters were definitely really good. So that's why I've used Striker in this, because I think Striker gets a lot of unnecessary hate, and he's one of my favorite Mortal Kombat characters, so I think he deserves like a little bit of showcasing, and here we are with Striker. But what this game did really well was that it basically redid the mechanics to make the game a little bit more playable. Like, now you had the thumbstick and all the moves were easier to do. They brought in additional moves, the X-ray moves, which were pretty cool, and obviously they updated the graphics to look really good. And they went back to what made Mortal Kombat like really good, like the whole saga of Earthrealm versus Outworld, and Shao Kahn being the big bad and fighting him in like a good fighting game setting again, which hadn't been done since like Mortal Kombat 2 and Mortal Kombat 3, because later on as the series progressed they introduced a lot of like new villains who were like either more powerful than Shao Kahn or just as powerful as Shao Kahn, like Onaga, and then they had Quan Chi and Shang Tsung doing all the scheming and like the dirty tactics to try and be the supreme rulers of the Mortal Kombat universe. All that was going on, but when I got this game like way back in 2011, and I remember going to Best Buy on like the first day it released. They didn't really do a midnight release for it, so I was in college at the time, and then I went like in the morning and bought this game for like something ridiculous, like $80 or like $90 or like however much it was for the Xbox 360, and played the living shit out of it. Like, the story mode was also something that they added that was really, really cool and hadn't been done in like the previous Mortal Kombat games, which was carried forward from MK versus DC, and it felt and looked pretty good, like seeing the story of the three Mortal Kombat games progress linearly as you play from character to character, right from Mortal Kombat 1 to like the end of Mortal Kombat 3. And then there were like the ladder fights and the arcade mode, which was also pretty good, and each character had a unique ending. So I remember playing the game a lot, like with Sub-Zero, Johnny Cage, Striker, all my favorite characters. And overall, game was really good. It played really good. Like, it as far as like the improvement goes, like it was improved in like every area, the graphics, the gameplay, all that was heavily improved. The controls, as someone who played Mortal Kombat 2 and Mortal Kombat 3 back in the day, I can say that this game basically improved on everything those two games did, and the remake improved on those because technology progressed forward. Mortal Kombat 3 was released like way back in like 1995, and Mortal Kombat 2 was released way back in 1993. So if you go from 1995 to 2011, you have like 17 years, and how much technology progressed in 17 years is how much they could improve the gameplay of Mortal Kombat 2 and Mortal Kombat 3, and that's exactly what they did with Mortal Kombat 9. So for all the improvements and for like polishing all the pioneering that Mortal Kombat 1, 2, and 3 did, all the years later, Mortal Kombat 9 is number 6 on our list. Alright, so next up we have X-Men vs. Street Fighter, which originally released in the arcades in 1996. Now, I had no idea that this game even existed until like 2001 when I saw this in the arcade. And I saw this game in the summer of 2001 when me, my bro, my mom were visiting India. We were visiting my dad for the summer. So I saw this in one of the malls, and I was like instantly blown away. Like we moved to Canada at that time, but that's when I saw this game in a mall in India, and I immediately like got drawn to it, like the fast-paced action and the larger-than-life moves that took up like 70% of the screen, like Cyclops' Mega Optic Blast. Just its general faithfulness to the look of the X-Men animated series and the Street Fighter Alpha games, because an interesting story is that like just a year before, in 2000, when the X-Men movie had released, the first live action movie X-Men had released, that was my introduction to X-Men. So I saw that movie, and then that got me like familiar with the characters. So after the movie in like 2000, I used to come back from school and watch the animated TV show at 4:30. It always used to be on. And then in the summer of 2001, like when we were visiting my dad in India, because the school was out and the summer holidays were going on in Canada, we saw this game in the arcades, and I just couldn't get enough of it. So I was able to convince like my mom and dad to give me some money to play this, but I got like beat the fuck up, obviously, because I didn't know like how to play the game back then, and I didn't know how to do the moves and all that. But it was still a lot of fun, and my go-to team back then was Cyclops and Ryu, and Cyclops and Wolverine, mostly Cyclops and Wolverine, because of X-Men the animated series and the amount we used to like that TV show. So yeah, this was like literally like I would say the one game that revolutionized crossover fighting, because no one thought that X-Men and Street Fighter would go this well. But like I stated previously, like the graphics were amazing, the fast-paced action, like the gameplay. It's everything about this game was amazing. Like when you saw it in theaters back in the day, you were blown away, like just how good this game looked. So because of like the really good gameplay, the fast gameplay, the larger than life moves, the amazing graphics, the attention to detail, and how much like this game revolutionized the crossover fighting genre, this is number 5 on our list. Because keep in mind that before this, there weren't a lot of crossovers, and this game was like literally the game that started the crossover series between Marvel and Capcom, which got better with Marvel vs. Capcom and Marvel vs. Capcom 2. But like we said before, like just to draw back on previous analogies, like let's just say that X-Men vs. Street Fighter would walk, so that Marvel vs. Capcom 1 and Marvel vs. Capcom 2, Marvel vs. Capcom 3, Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite could run. So this game laid the foundation. We loved it and loved just about everything about this game. So it's on number 5 at our list. So for number 4, we have Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters for the Super Nintendo. Now, everyone loves the Ninja Turtles. By everyone, I mean like a lot of people, because way back in like the late 1980s and the early 1990s, Ninja Turtles was extremely popular. It was like everywhere. People just couldn't get enough, and it was like Ninja Turtles action figures, Ninja Turtles TV shows, Ninja Turtles movies, Ninja Turtles comics, and Ninja Turtles video games. Like the Turtle Mania was everywhere back then, and some of the best beat 'em ups involved the Ninja Turtles on the Nintendo and Super Nintendo. And then with the introduction of the fighting game with Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat, the fighting game craze was going around. So it would only stand to reason that the Ninja Turtles would be awesome in a fighting game. And the result was that that proved true for Super Nintendo, but it didn't prove true for the Sega Genesis, because the Sega game was just bad in all ways compared to the Super Nintendo version. So my experience with the tournament fighters is that I didn't even know that the Super Nintendo version and the Genesis version even existed, because way back then, like when the fighting game craze was going around all over the world, this game got sandwiched in between like very big fighting games like Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, Tekken, Virtua Fighter, Killer Instinct, all those games, which were like much bigger fighting games back then. Like they sort of like sidelined Ninja Turtles tournament fighters for like a lot of people, and those franchises were the ones that people were talking about. So that's why this unfortunately this game didn't receive the recognition it deserved. But I was introduced to this game in the summer of 2001 again, when a friend showed it to me on an emulator, and that's when I got introduced to Mugen also, because my brother showed me how Mugen worked. So I got introduced to both at the same time. And for anyone who doesn't know, like Mugen is basically a fighting game engine which you can use to make various characters like fight other characters. Like you can create like in-universe games like Street Fighter 1, 2, and 3 all put together, or you can make like very weird crossovers, like I don't know, like Ninja Turtles versus like Clay Fighter or whatever. But anyways, going off topic again. So in the summer of 2001, I got introduced to Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters, which is this game. And I was using an emulator to play it because I never had a Super Nintendo at all. So the only way to play the games when the Super Nintendo was out of the market was basically emulators. And with emulators way back in the day, like in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, mostly the early 2000s, we didn't have a gamepad back then, so we had to use the keys on the computer to play this game, and it was really hard to use the keys. And I wasn't as good with fighting games as I am now, so I used to get the shit kicked out of me back then by the computer, even on the easier difficulty settings. So that's why I sort of sidelined Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters for like a really long time, from like 2001 until like recently, like the fall of 2024 is when I got back into Ninja Turtles, because I was doing all my like Ninja Turtle retrospectives, and the Cowabunga collection recently released, and it sort of like inhaled some new life into these games, which were lying dormant for like the longest time. So I thought like might as well give it a try, and when I played this game, I figured that it was like really good, and it was really fun, like as long as you knew what you were doing and you knew how to do the moves, which thankfully they made really easy to do in the Super Nintendo version, which is why I really like this game. And when I played it like now using a controller and on the Cowabunga collection and on like the emulator that you see right now, which upscales the graphics by a lot and makes the gameplay look a lot less pixelated, like this game was basically just a blast for me. And even though like it takes like a lot of like moves from Street Fighter, like Donatello's like flash bow swings, which is like that flash bow flood, is very similar to Chun-Li's like fast kicks, and Rat King's pile driver is pretty similar to Zangief's pile driver. Even like Shredder's uppercut, where he goes like war or aura. It's actually supposed to say aura, but it sounds like war football. Like that's pretty similar to Balrog or Boxer's uppercut from Street Fighter 2. So you can see that this game is pretty like heavily inspired by Street Fighter 2, to the point that it has like a lot of similar moves, and even this wing nuts like sort of like biting you is pretty similar to like Blanca biting you. So this constant like biting your opponent, which is a move that Blanca had. But I mean, like what it does originally is a lot too. Like it has like a lot of like its own moves, like Leonardo's Shining Cutter, Roto Cutter, and the Endless Loop, which is not like taken from Street Fighter at all. And Michelangelo's Dragon Breath, and the what's it called? Raging Thunder, where he like uses his nunchucks and sort of does a Shoryuken. Like that's not taken from Street Fighter either. So it adds like a lot of originality to the fighting game genre as well. And the other part is this like super meter that you see over here. In most games, you basically have your super meter, and the more like moves you do, the more it charges. But one innovation from this game was that if you defend a lot and just keep going on the defensive and hope that your opponent makes a mistake, that's where the meter used to punish you. Like your meter would go down and your opponent's meter would go up if you sort of like kept playing a very defensive style, because this game awarded being on the offensive, which I thought was also pretty good. So all in all, this game was like really good when it released, and it still is. Like it's still played in tournaments, and it's still played online, which just basically shows how good the game actually is. And since I'm a big Ninja Turtle fan, you can see like why I would like this game a lot. The only complaint I have is the roster. Like I mean, way back then, they got the Ninja Turtle license for the first 4 Ninja Turtle games. Like the first 3 were on the 8-bit Nintendo, and then Ninja Turtles 4, Turtles in Time, was on Super Nintendo. And then this game was also on Super Nintendo, but for some odd reason, they wanted to use the characters from the Archie comics instead of the characters from the animated TV show. That's why you see characters like Wingnut and War and basically Armagon and those guys, and there's no Bebop, Rocksteady, there's no Leatherhead, Baxter Stockman, all those guys. So the only sort of like complaint I have is that they should have just used the roster from the most popular version, and that way the game would have sold more, and it would have had like more nostalgia associated with it. But like I mean, even in this state, the game is extremely good, and I love it in like every possible way ever since I got reacquainted with it. And just before we go, the fun fact is that like when you're fighting a mirror opponent like this, like you have the colors of the Archie comics, and your opponent actually has like the colors of the Playmates figures, which were going around way back in like 1998. Sorry, not 1998, 1988, when the Playmates figures started circulating. So if you see like Leonardo's color right now, it looks exactly similar to the Playmates figures that were released in 1988, when Turtle Mania was like at an all-time high. So that's a lot of information, and I just wanted to like basically say why I love tournament fighters so much, and those are all the reasons. And we're moving on now. Alright, so next up we have Injustice 1 at number 3 and Injustice 2 at number 2. The reason I mentioned both of these games together is because they're both part of the same series, and I'm not really going with that rule of like having one game per franchise. We can have as many games per franchise as we want. Like the whole list can just be Street Fighter games and Mortal Kombat games. whatever. Because I mean, finally, it's like which actual game brought you the most joy, not about like experiencing the most amount of games possible. So, anyways, with Injustice 1, all I can really say is that being a huge DC Comics fan, as you already know, like I would say DC Comics is my favorite fictional franchise of all time, so including like everything put together. So it's no surprise that Injustice would be like super high on my list, and having the Mortal Kombat team develop this game was another like added incentive. Like the gameplay was heavily uh, like the style of Mortal Kombat, and the mechanics were heavily inspired by Mortal Kombat, and basically used the Mortal Kombat style, which made the game really, really fun and good. So it was like having the DC characters in a Mortal Kombat game, just minus the fatalities, but everything else was already there. And then they added the hypers, which were also pretty cool. Like you just press two buttons and you do a hyper. If it manages to hit, then it does like a lot of damage, like 30% damage off your one health bar. So I thought like that addition was pretty cool because like you're using superheroes and like as super powerful characters, so it's no surprise that they would have like devastating moves that when they hit they do a lot of damage. And the other part that I really loved about Injustice was the story, because the story was really good for a fighting game. Like we didn't get like very good story modes until I would say MK versus DC came along. So that's another field where MK versus DC pioneered, but gets a lot of unnecessary hate as being like an awful game, which I think is not very good and not very fair. But anyways, for the MK versus DC story, like I loved how they had like the whole theme of like basically freedom versus dictatorship, and how the heroes can also become bad guys, and how like just about anyone who's superpowered is fighting just about anyone who's superpowered. Like it's not just the heroes versus the villains. Like there is the heroes versus villains element, but it's not the entire game. Like when you go on the arcade ladder, you can like pick a hero and choose to fight only villains, which is like a really good addition. But there's more to the game because it shows like the gray areas of ethics and everything, and how a hero can go bad and how a villain can go good if like circumstances were to play out in like a certain way, which is like the whole description and explanation as to why Superman basically becomes, as you can say, a bad guy by starting his dictatorship and like basically wanting to like subjugate everyone and taking their free will away. So that was another reason why I really loved this game. Like all the themes that were explored, and all the ways the characters had different moralities. Like characters that you would expect to have a good morality might have a bad morality, and characters who have a bad morality might have a good morality, like the Earth 2 Lex Luthor, who wasn't a bad guy and was actually helping out the heroes. So I thought that aspect was pretty cool. And then just like MK versus DC, like this game was also one in which Superman like basically saved the day in the end of the game. Like you saw Batman for trying for like 5 years to overthrow the dictator Superman's corrupt regime, or like just regime. I don't know how corrupt it was. Probably wasn't corrupt, but it was really how should I say, like ruthless and sort of strict about like imposing his will and not having any opposition. So yeah, going back to what we were saying before, like you saw like Batman for 5 years trying to overthrow dictator Superman's regime, and the only way they were able to do it was when they brought Superman from Earth 1, the good Superman from Earth 1, to like basically neutralize the dictator Superman from Earth 2. So that scene in which like you see Superman go through the portal from Earth 1 to Earth 2 to fight for everyone on Earth 2 who's on the losing side and can't seem to win the fight had me like fanboying in all sorts of ways, and I got so excited when I saw that scene. So I would say like what one of the biggest reasons why I'm so heavily inspired by the superheroes, and even though like sometimes the supervillains have very good arguments and very good reasoning, like Joker from Dark Knight and a bunch of other villains from like a bunch of other franchises. But it's the portrayals of the superheroes in this game that basically made me a superhero fanboy about like how like basically the democratic Superman talks to like the dictator Superman, and he says like I understand what you've lost and I'm sorry for what you've lost, but that doesn't give us the right to like basically impose our will on like the entire world and subjugate the entire world to what we think is right and wrong, because like everyone's opinion matters and everyone should have a say. And just the whole environment of having to bring superheroes to fight like dictators is sort of like a theme that we see all too often in like real life, and it mirrors real life, which is what really resonated with me. So it's for this reason that I put the first Injustice game on number 3. Alright, so at number 2 we have Injustice 2, and this game basically improved on the first one in just about every possible way. The story evolved further, and the rivalry and the continuous battle back and forth between Batman, who's trying to keep democracy and basically free will alive in Earth 2, and Superman, who's trying to re-establish his dictatorship, continues, and it's further explored. But not only that, not only is the whole theme of the democratic Batman versus the dictator Superman from the first game continuing, but Earth also faces a new challenge with Brainiac's invasion, so all the heroes have to put their differences aside and work together to fight off Brainiac, which I think was a really good addition. So this game actually gave the dictator Superman a little bit of a redemption arc. Like, sure, he enslaved the population of the world in the previous game and wanted to destroy and wanted to destroy Metropolis and Gotham in the first game to make an example out of everyone for resisting his rule. But then you get this sort of like redemption arc for the dictator Superman, who's like one of the few people who's both intelligent enough and strong enough to be able to fight Brainiac. And when I say be able to fight Brainiac, I mean actually fight Brainiac and defeat Brainiac, but not just be able to fight him like on a level playing field. But yeah, so going back to the redemption arc, this game sort of gave Superman, the dictator Superman of Earth 2, a redemption arc. Like he was all evil and tried to destroy 2 cities in the previous game. But then if he's able to stop Brainiac's invasion and defeat Brainiac, like does that sort of give him a redemption? Is that a way for him to like possibly atone for his sins and be integrated back into society if he agrees to compromise on his like very rigid stance of wanting to like run the world using his vision of law and order? Like that's open to interpretation. So like you can ask a whole bunch of people this question, is that do you think that in Injustice 2, if Superman was the one who defeated Brainiac, like would that excuse his behavior in Injustice 1? And you'd get different answers, which I thought was a really cool part of the story. And like it further also enhanced the gameplay, like introduced a bigger roster, a lot more characters who weren't there in the first game, like introduced a bunch of skins that you could unlock. And then it also had the Ninja Turtles and Mortal Kombat characters making a guest appearance, which I thought was really, really cool. So yeah, Injustice 2 has a bigger roster than Injustice 1, and brings a lot of characters who weren't given the opportunity to shine in the first game, and it adds a lot of favorite crossover characters. Like, it gave a chance for me to combine my favorite fictional franchise of all time, DC Comics, my second favorite fictional franchise of all time, Ninja Turtles, and have characters from both franchises fight it out in like a new game with like basically 4K graphics in HDR, which was pretty cool. And yeah, and it also added like one of the basically the strongest characters in the DC multiverse, Brainiac, as the final boss. And the way Brainiac's mechanics worked, and the way his moves were and all his attacks were like really well programmed and really well executed, which was what made Injustice like super fun. And fighting him on like the harder difficulties, like hard and very hard, is like really fun. He has this like really cheap move in his spaceship where he gets this like metallic robotic like huge ass arm to like just pick you up and throw you all over the place, and the arm is really fast too, so it's hard to dodge. And he just dishes out so much damage and takes so much damage that that boss fight was like excruciatingly hard on hard difficulty. But it was just like so much fun because it's actually like how you would fight Brainiac if you were in the DC multiverse and fighting him actually. It's like the only part about Injustice 2 I didn't like was like their overemphasis on like selling extra DLC, selling like the game 2 times, like the regular edition and then the full edition like later on, and then having you grind for like all the gear in the game and everything. Like those were the only 2 parts I didn't like. Like, it's like, why couldn't we unlock all that like just from the beginning? I mean, and pay like once for the game. That's how it should have been. So it's for this reason I don't really consider it the best fighting game ever made. But because it does so much right, we have it like literally on number 2 on our list, which is very high on our list. And then at number 1 we have Marvel vs. Capcom 2, which released way back for the arcades in 2000. And this game has been ported over to a lot of systems ever since, and it also got a little bit of a remaster in 2009 for the Xbox 360 and the PS3. So my favorite version is the Xbox 360 and the PS3 version because it upscales the graphics and makes it so that the game runs on the 16:9 setting on 1080p. And yeah, like, I mean, the amount this game innovated and the amount it basically revolutionized the genre is probably more than any other fighting game on the face of the planet if you're going just by innovation and revolutions. So this game basically had a roster of and it still has 56 characters that are playable, and the one final boss, Abyss, so if you count him, who's unplayable, it's a total of 57 characters. And way back in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, like, this was unheard of, to have a fighting game with 56 playable characters. And the other really big blessing was that in the versus games, in the Marvel Capcom versus games, which includes X-Men versus Street Fighter, Marvel Superheroes versus Street Fighter, they made the hypers like really easy to do, which was a really big blessing, because in Street Fighter 3 the hypers and the ultras were pretty hard to do. Like I told you, like, you had to, for some of the characters you had to do the double quarter circle, and for some of the characters you had to like take the thumbstick on a 45-degree angle and charge the move and execute an ultra that way. But for the Versus series, the most complicated it was that you would basically have to charge Guile's flash kick, but all the hypers were like super easy to do. Like, you just press quarter circle and you press like 2 punches and you do the hyper, and you press quarter circle and you press 2 kicks and you do the hyper that way. Like, there was none of that, like those inputs that make you basically do a really hard move in like a 1 second window. None of that. So it's for this reason this game is this high up on the list, and just about every game we've had on this list, the hardest move to do is a hyper in which you just press quarter circle max with 3 buttons, like quarter circle along with like 3 punches or quarter circle along with 3 kicks, because that's how I think how complicated like a fighting game should be max as far as like the inputs go. And the other part of this game was that since I keep talking about like how much it innovated and revolutionized, it's because of the art style of this game that we have a lot of really cool Mugen characters, because like a lot of cool Mugen characters which fans have made by themselves and uploaded onto the engine, which lets you customize a lot. Like a lot of their art style is based on the art style in the Marvel vs. Capcom games. So you can say that without the Marvel vs. Capcom games, we wouldn't have really some amazing Mugen characters that we love playing and we love to have in like the modded games. We can trace like the thanks back to this game. And then the other basically big revolution and innovation was, if you like, those really big final boss characters like Apocalypse, Galactus, Onslaught. You can thank the Marvel vs. Capcom series, because the Marvel vs. Capcom games were like the first games to do it. And when I say the Marvel vs. Capcom games, I mean the crossover Marvel vs. Capcom games in general, which includes X-Men vs. Street Fighter and Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter as well. Not just Marvel vs. Capcom 1, 2, 3, and Infinite, but like all the crossover games between Marvel and Capcom. Like those games were the ones that pioneered having those super big final bosses to fight, like Galactus. So you can hurl another thanks that way, because if we wouldn't have these games, we wouldn't have like those epic boss battles like we do with these games. And then also I'd like to add that this was one of the few games that actually gave us a lot of the Street Fighter characters on the Capcom side that you could use, and a lot of X-Men characters on the Marvel side that you could use, which I think are two very good franchises to have a lot of representation from. Like going forward in Marvel vs. Capcom 3 and Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, like in Marvel vs. Capcom 3, I think you only had like literally like 4 Street Fighter characters, were like Ryu, Chun-Li, Crimson Viper, Akuma. And then in Infinite, you only had Ryu and Chun-Li. Considering there's so many cool Street Fighter characters, and Street Fighter is like the most popular fighting game franchise that Capcom has, you would want more representation from the Street Fighters. Like you can see over here, like in Marvel vs. Capcom 2, there was Charlie and Guile, and for one of the few times, like their moves weren't excruciatingly hard to pull off. So the game even had Charlie, and really like the only purpose Charlie has served in like the Street Fighter series is to like basically be the guy in Guile's origin who made Guile who Guile is today in like the Street Fighter series. So I think Charlie is like a super underrated character that deserves like more recognition as far as like the Street Fighter games go. So we had Charlie in this game. We also had like other like very like obscure Street Fighter characters like Dan, as you can see, and I think that's what made this game like really good, because a lot of people like the Street Fighter characters and they want to see them in the Marvel vs. Capcom series, but as time went on, like they kept sidelining the Street Fighter characters and like sort of like inserting more of like the obscure characters that people like don't even know about, like that one character who looks like Lego, and Tron Bone, and like that monkey woman that they have in Marvel vs. Capcom 2 also, and like Shenko from Darkstalkers, I think, in Marvel vs. Capcom 3, who I think is not like well known enough and could easily have made way for some of like the Street Fighter characters to be in the game, as opposed to like having very like obscure Capcom characters. But I mean, I digress, and I think I'm ranting like a little bit too much about how much I want the Street Fighter characters to be in the Marvel vs. Capcom series. But like all these reasons are the reasons why Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is so high on the list. It's not just that like the game is an amazing standalone game by itself. Like you can keep playing it over and over and you won't get bored, but it's like the amount that it did for like fighting games in general is like one of the really big reasons why it's on the top spot. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed my list, and I hope I haven't angered like a lot of people by advocating like more like newbie friendly and like more less expert friendly games on the fighting game scene. So I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.